Welcome to Great Loop Radio, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today, I am excited to welcome back Dave Fuller and add in Nan Ellen Fuller. They are both directors at the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. Dave is the director of education, and Nan Ellen is about to assume the role of director of recreational boating safety outreach. So thrilled to have them both with us. Before we jump into the conversation, I do want to take a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Curtis Stokes & Associates, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with that out of the way, Dave and Nan Ellen Fuller, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, well, I'm not sure what time of day you're going to be watching this, but good day, whatever time.
Yeah, whatever time it is fine with us. And Nan Ellen, congratulations. I know in just a few days from now, you assume the role of Director of Recreational Boating Safety Outreach for the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, why don't you just real briefly tell us what that role entails?
The RBS outreach,
Yes.
We basically interface with our partners that are also in the industry of recreational boating safety and work together and collaborate to try to improve boating safety on the water.
Yeah, well, again, congratulations on that position. And Dave, you've been with us before, but you are the current Director of Education for the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary, excuse me. So obviously, two wonderful people to have with us. They are also long-term members, and we thank you for that. So today's topic is really how to use the VHF radio effectively. And I find myself included, for people who don't regularly use the VHF in their previous boating, when they start the loop, it can be a little bit intimidating to kind of know the right way to use it. And a lot of local boating, you really don't have as much opportunity. And we know we've got lots of brand new boaters. So we get asked questions about this a lot, and had a suggestion from a listener that we, kind of go through some of the ways you're going to use the radio with actual examples. So we're thrilled to have the two of you so that you can play both parts of the roles on those different conversations on the VHF radio. But before we kind of do that role play, if you will, tell us about some of the keys to success in using the VHF radio successfully.
Well, Kim, thank you for the introduction here. VHF is only one method of communication you'll be using while you're on the loop. And I think it's one of the most important because it allows you to talk to not just one other boater, but multiple other boaters. Anybody that's within earshot and within receiving range of your radio will hear you talking. It's extremely important for safety of navigation. Actually, there's some navigation rules that talk about that, and I'll get into that when we get in a little bit later into the conversation here. But it can be used for a variety of reasons. Most of all, and what everybody has to remember is the FCC is in charge of the use of the marine VHF frequencies, and the authorized use is primarily that of safety. There's some other uses as well, and I'll get into that later. But it's a really important part of your total communications package, and knowing how to use it is really important for your safety and also for your ability to move through the loop easier as you request lock openings and bridge openings and so forth like that. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it's important to remember, that God gave us two ears and one mouth for a reason. And I learned that in ham radio a long time ago. Listen before you begin speaking. So don't just jump on and start talking because you might be interfering with somebody else's conversation. So listen first before you begin speaking.
Yeah, and you stress that, preparation and patience are keys here. But for a couple of the reasons you just mentioned, I think are why some people are intimidated by using the VHF. One, that yes, everybody within a certain distance can hear you. So people who are, not real comfortable with public speaking may worry about making a mistake. And also, as you just
Yep.
said, you should listen first because you could be interfering with somebody else's conversation. So I think that's also a stressor for people who are not comfortable with it. So I love that, you talk about preparation as one of the keys to success. And that's a lot of the reason we're doing this today, and actually having you and Nan Ellen kind of go through what those conversations sound like so people can start to familiarize themselves and use that as a practice point. But let's go ahead. In kind of our preparation for this conversation, you talked about some best practices. So go ahead and start.
Yeah.
I think the first one was having 2 VHF radios.
Yeah. Every prudent mariner should have at least 2. And I recommend at least one of those 2 radios be a handheld. If you want to have multiple handhelds, that's a good idea. If you want to have multiple, what we call mobile radios, which are the ones that are kind of built into the boat, that's also a good idea. Just like in fire extinguishers, you can't have too many. I feel the same way on VHF radios. And the reason for that is because you're going to need to monitor more than one frequency at a time. And in the marine bands, they're actually called channels. All of the channels have been assigned to a certain frequency that the FCC assigned, but you're going to be really listening to about 3 or 4 of them. And the 2 most common ones that you'll be using is 13 and 16. So starting off by telling you a little bit about 13. 13 is designated as the what's called bridge to bridge channel. And what that means is the command of one vessel to the command of the other vessel. So you're talking directly from one captain to the other one. And the same thing applies to when you're communicating on 13 to bridges and locks. You'll be talking from your command to their command. And one of the nice things about channel 13 is your radio, your high-powered radio that's built into the boat is set to automatically switch to low power when it's switched to that channel. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned earlier, when you talk on this, you're going to be broadcasting over a fairly large area. And the low power kind of makes that footprint a little smaller. If you're talking to a bridge and there's another bridge that you're going to have to talk to 2 miles away, everybody at both bridges is going to hear your conversation if you're on high power. So having that low power setting and the radio does it automatically for you. You don't have to switch it. But I will tell you that every other channel can be switched to low power if you choose to do so, but you'll have to pull out the owner's manual and take a look and see how that's accomplished. But the other channel that you're going to be using quite frequently, probably the most used one, would be channel 16, 16. And that is designated nationally as the hailing channel. And that's when you want to talk to another boat or a shore station. You don't know what channel they're monitoring. And, the FCC set a rule out that says that anytime you're moving in your boat and you have the radio turned on, the navigation rules require, not suggest, but require that you monitor this channel. And so it's very helpful to have 2 radios. One turned to 13 to do the close-in communications, the other to 16, and the 16 one would be the one you would monitor to hear somebody trying to call you. So as a minimum, I'd recommend 2. If you want to have more, that's a good idea as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dave, what about sorry, just a question about that. As you're talking about having 2 so you can monitor 2 different channels, what about the radios that will scan certain channels for you? If you have one of those, would you still suggest having a second radio there at the helm with you?
Yes, I do. And I think one of the things that happens when you, depending on the radio that you have, how it monitors multiple channels. Some have what's called dual watch, some have tri-watch, which means they're capable of watching, 2 or 3 different frequencies, including the one that you're on. And again, you'll have to pull out the owner's manual and see how to accomplish that, because every radio's got a little different procedure for how to do it. But to avoid confusion, when you call out of a call, and I'm going to get to this in a minute when we go through a call, if you're calling another boat and they have multiple radios on, they may not know which radio is squawking at them. And so, as part of that conversation, you should include what channel you're calling on, because what happens is when the radio is scanning, it will stop on when it picks up a call, and then very quickly after that audio goes away, it'll start scanning again.
Mhm.
And unless you're looking at the radio, you're going to miss what channel that call came in on. So it's anybody's guess as to which channel they're calling you on. So making that a part of your call, I think, is really an important best practice that you should get in that habit.
Okay. And then some best practices you recommend regarding the handheld.
Well, this may seem obvious, but guilty, Your Honor. I've done this before. Not charging your handheld radio every night, and then you go the next day to use it, and you push the talk button, and nothing happens. And oh no, I forgot to charge it up. So, kind of put that on your checklist of stuff to do. When you get into port, or you put out the hook for the night. Plug your handheld radio in, get it charged up, so when you need it the most, it's ready to go. There's not a whole lot of things more disappointing than a dead battery in your radio when you need to use it.
Right.
So, I'm a big fan of handheld radios because you can carry it wherever you need to go. If you need to go to another part of the boat, or if you need to go handle a line or whatever, you've got that radio contact right at your hand. You don't have to run back and forth from the helm to whatever task that you're doing at that particular time.
Right.
Your primary VHF radio is a 25-watt unit. That's the FCC maximum output that radio theoretically can output. If you really get down to it, by the time you have some losses through the cable and the losses in the antenna, the best setups are around 22, 23 watts. But in any case, that radio can reach a lot further. It's capable of reaching a lot further than any handheld. And primarily that's due to the antenna height of that antenna and the efficiency of the antenna versus the little rubber duck antenna of the handheld. Those handhelds are designed to be used for close in work. Your big VHF antennas are, they're 6, 8, 10, 15 feet off the water. And that gives them quite a bit more of a horizon. A lot of people may not understand or know this, but part of the physics of radio and the frequencies, VHF frequencies fall into a series of frequencies that are line of sight, which means they'll go to the horizon, and then after they go over the horizon, they continue into outer space. So, there's a little bit of bending as it goes over the horizon. It's the horizon plus about 10% thereabouts. But generally, the higher you can get that antenna, the better, longer distance you can communicate. So, like, for example, when we crossed the Gulf of Mexico on the loop, we were, 60, 70 miles offshore. And we heard the Coast Guard all night. They were looking for a sailboat, and they put out a marine assistance broadcast. And we heard them all night long. Every hour on the hour, they were looking for this sailboat. And the reason we could hear them is because they're on a very, very, very tall tower on shore, and that raises the horizon, to the other boat. But typically, 10, 12 miles, maybe 15 at the most. But a handheld, you're going to be lucky to get 5 or 6 miles.
Right. Okay. I want to make sure we leave time to go through some of the more frequent calls you would want to use on the loop. But for those who want to dive a little deeper into this, and everyone really should as they're preparing for the loop, what are a few of the good sources for information that people can turn to do some more studying and planning on their own?
Well, I think the very best one, and one that you should have bookmarked already, if you haven't been there, go there, spend some time, look around. Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard has a website called the Nav Center. If you do a search for it, just do U.S. Coast Guard Nav Center, and I'm not going to give you all the letters and stuff for it, but you can do a search for it. That has an abundance of information, including everything that has to do with navigation. All the rules are there. The communications stuff is there. The charts with the phonetic alphabet and numbers are found there. They got a channel chart there that gives the channel use of all of the USA channels. And real quick note, some of the newest radios on the market may be designated in 4-digit channel numbers. And that's a new numbering system that's coming around. Now, there's still a bazillion boats out there that's got the old 2-channel radios like almost all the rest of us do.
Oh.
But the 4-digit numbers, you need to know what each one of those is. And there's a chart there that kind of gives you the conversion, tells you which one is which.
Okay.
The FCC, as I said before, regulates the frequencies and sets the rules. And as I said, Marine radio's authorized priority starts with safety of life. So the priority order of communications, meaning from the greatest priority to the least priority, you start out with distress, the Mayday calls, the urgency calls, and then safety communications. And then at the bottom of the authorized uses of service are other communications, which could be, calling for a bridge opening, calling, to see if you got a slip at the marina and so forth. So all those other things are higher priority. And if you hear one of those calls, you need to cease what you're doing and pay attention to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
One other,
go
I just want to mention one other one. Another reference is NOAA. That's the Office of the Coast Survey. And you'll have to search for that. If you just do a NOAA one, you're going to get the Weather Service and everything else. But do NOAA Office of the Coast Survey. And that's got a tremendous amount of information. It has all your ENC charts, the ones you can download for free. It's also got something in it called the Coast Pilot. And most people have never seen the Coast Pilot. The Coast Pilot volumes they're primarily written for commercial interests, but they do have a tremendous amount of information applicable to recreational boaters. And that would include the heights of the bridges, the radio channels monitored by the bridges and the locks and so forth, and a lot of other information. It's important to note that they just cover the coastal areas and the Great Lakes, but they do not cover the inland rivers. So those are two really good resources.
Perfect. Definitely appreciate that. Let's take a quick break. We'll play a message from one of our sponsors. And when we come back, I want to dive right into some of the examples of the calls you will use the VHF for on the loop. So we'll be back in a moment.
Cutterman Marine Services is a vessel relocation and delivery service owned and operated by retired and former members of the U.S. Coast Guard. They have crews ready to exceed your expectations wherever your vessel is located. In addition to relocation and delivery services, they offer a host of other marine services such as new owner training. Check out their website at www.cuttermanllc.com or call 855-65-BOATS. You have a lot invested in your boat. Why would you trust it to someone other than the Cutterman? Cutterman Marine Services. Professional, knowledgeable, capable, experienced.
We're back on Great Loop Radio. Today our topic is effective use of the VHF radio on the Great Loop. My guests are Dave and Nan Ellen Fuller. Dave is the Director of Education for the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and Nan Ellen is about to assume the role of the Director of Recreational Boating Outreach for the Coast Guard Auxiliary. So we are thrilled to have them both with us today. And let's go ahead and jump in. One of the common uses of the VHF on the Great Loop, beyond safety, which is its primary role, is contacting a bridge tender to request an opening. So walk us through how that works.
Okay, Kim. Well, I guess you start with the beginning. Before you can communicate, you got to find out what channel are they on. So most of the time you're going to be using channel 13, but depending on location, like for example, in Florida, they use pretty much exclusively channel 9. Other places they may use channel 14, or they may use some other channel. But again, channel 13 will be most likely the one you should probably start looking at that. So how do you know which one? You can look, as I mentioned before, the Coast Pilot, a lot of the guidebooks will give you that information. And then the other place, and this is a lot less, you can't count on it quite as much, is there's a signboards adjacent to most bridges. But in my experience, they're not always really readable because of all of the slime and bird doo-doo and everything else that happens to them. So, try and do your homework ahead of time and try and find out, first of all, what's the name of the bridge, what channel's it on, what's the clearances. You may find out that you can get under the bridge without even having to have it raised. So know all that before you get there. The second thing is be prepared to remain in a holding pattern should that bridge be not able to open quickly. I recall one that I had particularly had trouble with downtown Jacksonville, Florida on the St. Johns River. Unless you've got a 4-foot clearance, you're not going to make it under the bridge. It's a railroad bridge. And there's been many times we tried to go past that bridge that we had to hold for over 30 minutes. And in a 8 or 10 knot current, that's a big challenge and there's no place to anchor. So have a plan and be ready to practice defensive driving because you don't really know the skills of the other boaters waiting for the lock opening as well. So once you're ready to approach the bridge and request the opening, now, you've got everything ready to go. You've talked to your crew, you've briefed them on their responsibilities. Check for clearance if you need to lower an antenna. Whatever you need to do, be prepared before you get there. So the call should go something like this. So I'll have Nan Ellen play the part of the boat, and then I'll be the bridge tender. So
45th Street Bridge, 45th Street Bridge, 45th Street Bridge. This is recreational vessel Wacky 3, downbound, requesting an opening on channel 13. Over.
All right. The word over is a pro word, which means you're expecting the other radio station to reply to you. You always start the call by identifying whom you're calling. It's a best practice to repeat the name of whom you want to reach 3 times. And the reason for that is because they may be distracted. They may not hear the call if only done once. And particularly if they're scanning several channels. You're trying to get their attention, that particular station's attention. Then you've identified the name of your boat and you've stated that you're a recreational vessel, you're not commercial, that you are descending downstream in the river or southbound on the ICW on the East Coast, which tells them which direction you're approaching from. You want them to open the bridge and you're calling on channel 13. So you've given all the pertinent information in an easy to understand manner. So their reply could sound something like this, and I'll be the 45th Street Bridge. Wacky 3, just a few minutes over. So your reply should be
45th Street Bridge, this is Wacky 3. Roger, out.
Roger is a pro word that acknowledges that you heard and understood the communication. Patiently wait for the opening or additional radio communications. Frequently, pro words are not used in marine radio, and some may not understand them, but they're there to enhance the understanding of expectations for continued radio conversation. Maybe you'll even start a new fad if you use them all the time in your radio communications. I'm not sure that it's written anywhere, but as a courtesy, I always thank the tender or the lockmaster with a simple thank you as you pass under the bridge or proceed out of the lock.
45th Street Bridge, this is Wacky 3. Thanks for the opening, out.
And out is the pro word, meaning you're done speaking and you do not expect a response. Often the bridge tender or lockmaster will return good wishes, but it's not necessary to reply as you've already said out. And of course, if you can't reach them by radio, some bridges and locks, telephone numbers are listed in the charts and the guidebooks. Whether they'll answer the phone's another matter. I can't guarantee you they will or won't.
Of course, yep.
One other thought is, if you refer to the nav rules, you will see that under sound signals, you can do one prolonged blast and one short blast on your horn, and that indicates to the bridge tender that you're requesting an opening if you have to resort to sound signals.
Perfect. And hopefully we don't need to do that. But on the occasion that we do, that's why they're there. And I'll actually, probably another whole topic for another whole podcast, but those kind of date back
Yes.
to before there were VHF radios, and can still be
Yes.
used effectively today. So let's stick with
Well,
the
the nav
topic
rules
we're
say you
on.
can't.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The nav rules say, not only say you can, they say you must.
Right. And that honestly is something we probably should cover in another podcast. Sticking with when we use the VHF though, let's kind of run through the same thing. And it's very similar, but if you are contacting a lock master to request to be locked through.
Okay, I don't want to get too deep into this, but just as you prepare to go through a bridge, you've got to prepare, and it's critical for preparing for locking. You know, before you ever get close to the lock, you have to set all the fenders you're going to need. You're going to prepare your lines. You're going to brief the crew for responsibilities, and that's a whole new you could do a podcast just on preparation for locking.
Oh, absolutely.
But, you know, the communications advice applies to locks. The same ones apply to bridges. Know the name of the lock, the proper channel to call on. In places like the 10-tom, where there are several locks in close proximities, the lock masters usually talk to one another, and your current lock master will tell the next lock master, they got 10 wreck boats or whatever. They'll tell them to kind of know what's to expect coming their way. And when we did the 10-tom, they held up lockage several times waiting for the, kind of like a flock of ducks all coming in simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's two very important rules for locks. First, you're the lowest priority for the lock master if they have traffic waiting. Government vessels are first in order, and then commercial is second. Wreck boaters like us, we're at the bottom of the totem pole, and you might have to wait. Rarely will they mix in wreck boats with commercial boats, but they can do that if they have the permission of the commercial captain. The second rule is you're coming into the lockmaster's house, and their rules are to be followed regardless of your preferences. And back to best practices, have your defenders deployed on both sides, and have the lines ready to deploy to either side. You may decide you may wish to tie up on your starboard, but the lockmaster may say tie up on port. And on a windy day, swirling winds at the bottom of the lock may blow you to the other side than where you intended. So kind of be prepared for plan B. And again, speaking from experience, that's happened to us more than once. So always follow the lockmaster's instructions, or they're not going to go up or down until you comply. Their lock, their rules. So one other thing that I think is really important, even though I don't know that it's a rule or not, if you don't wear your life jackets on the rest of the trip, put them on when you go into the locks, and that just shows the lockmaster that you've got a very high regard for safety, and that is their number one concern above everything else. That they won't go up or down until they're sure that everything is safe. We witnessed in the Tennessee River a 50-foot boat not under command, doing a 360 in the lock with a person in the water, and it was no joke. If this guy hadn't been wearing a life jacket, we would have had a tragedy that day. But finally, another crew brought the boat under control, and just be courteous. Come in one at a time, exit the same way, proceed dead slow until you clear of the approach walls, because any waves at all you make reflect back on the next boat. So be courteous and patient. And again, I thank the lockmaster. But when you're requesting the lockage, it should sound something a little bit like this.
Wilson Lock, Wilson Lock, Wilson Lock. This is recreational vessel Wacky 3, upbound requesting lockage on channel 13. Over.
And again, you've called the name of the lock 3 times. You've identified your boat, you're a recreational boat, not a commercial. You're requesting upbound lockage. So you're coming upstream, so he knows which direction you're coming from. And you're calling him on channel 13. And you're requesting additional radio traffic because you used the pro word over. So the reply back from them could be, Wacky 3, I'll have it open in just a few minutes. Stand by to enter, over. Or they could just reply to, go have lunch as I got a couple hours of commercial traffic to lock through before it's your turn. So go find you a place to drop the hook and be patient. So, if the other station uses the pro word over, that means that they're expecting a response from you. And your response could be something as simple as Roger or standing by, Wacky 3 out. So that means that you understood what they, by using the pro word over, or you're standing by waiting for more communications. You're identifying yourself as Wacky 3 and you're saying out, which means you're not expecting any further conversation from them. And another best practice, anytime you're in the lock with the lockmaster, ask if they know about any traffic coming up for you at the next lock. So kind of help you maybe plan a little bit for delays. Because I'd much rather be drop the hook and casually wait until they call me on the radio instead of going around in circles.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next lock to open.
As you said, recreational vessels are the low man on the totem pole, so the waits can sometimes be long. And it's much easier to drop the hook than to continue to try and maneuver the boat in a somewhat confined space. So the other place on the rivers, especially that you're going to use that VHF, which is, a safety, but also a courtesy concern, is when you're contacting a tow captain and requesting to pass. So tell us how that all works, because I think that is another place that people sometimes are uncertain about the best practices to do that.
This is a really good one. This is the one you're going to use a lot more often than you think that you will. So all the commercial traffic will monitor channel 13, and they're also required, just like you are, to monitor 16. But I can tell you that they'll return your call much faster on 13 than they will on 16. So if you don't get them on 13, then switch to 16 and repeat the call. This is a really good time to put a plug in for AIS. Those of you that don't have it, I highly recommend it. I'm not going to go into the detail and types of transponders, because again, that's another whole podcast topic as well. But boats that have AIS, which is most commercial boats and a whole lot of rec boats, more and more recreation boats have, AIS installed in them, at least AIS receive. But it gives several really important pieces of data and displays them on your chart plotter. First is the name of the boat, their position in latitude, longitude, and then where they are graphically, on the chart plotter. It gives you their speed and their heading. If they are a commercial version AIS, they will give you additional information that really isn't pertinent to you, but it's interesting to know what destination, where they headed to, what kind of cargo are they carrying, and some other stuff. But once you know the name of the boat, because that's really the key here, it's a very simple matter to initiate the call. So the call would sound something like this.
Mary Sue, Mary Sue, Mary Sue. This is Wacky 3 approaching your stern, requesting passing instructions on channel 13. Over.
And I'm the commercial vessel Mary Sue. Wacky 3, you can take me on the ones. Over. And then you'll repeat back.
Mary Sue, taking you on the ones. Out.
All right, so I just kind of spoke in code. Most of you are probably saying, what the heck did he just say? So, but you're repeating back to the Mary Sue to confirm what you just heard. And this is really important because you want to make sure that you're both on the same page when it comes to which side to pass on. So you're going to hear a lot of terminology on the rivers of the ones and the twos. And this is kind of radio shorthand for the one whistle or the two whistles of intent that are required in navigation rules 32, 33, and 34. And those rules describe the actions that each vessel should take within sight of one another and relate to the sound signals required. On the radio, you accomplish the same thing with your intent and agreement of passing on the ones or the twos. So if you haven't looked at navigation rules 32, 33, and 34, I urge you to do so you kind of understand this a little bit better. So without knowing the name of the boat you're going to be meeting, you'll need to identify the type of the boat, whether it's a tow and so forth, and its approximate location. So the call for that might sound something like this.
Upbound tow at mile marker 454. This is Wacky 3 approaching your stern, requesting passing instructions on channel 13. Over.
Hopefully, when they call you back, they'll identify themselves so you can tell them by name. You can call them by name in subsequent radio communications, but I keep a small notepad and pen at the helm just so I can write stuff down, and kind of keep notes as we go along. So let me try and explain, what do the ones and the twos mean? The ones refer to your intent to leave the other boat on your port side. Effectively, this means you're going to be steering to the right and the overtaken vessel will be on your left. The twos just reverse this maneuver, meaning you intend to take the overtaken vessel on your starboard, meaning that you're going to steer left. An easy way to recall this rule, this is the way I teach it in classes, is to think of the hands on an analog clock. So, we all do digital stuff, but all of us are probably old enough to remember that there are analog clocks. And if you look at the 1 o'clock position, it's just to the right of dead ahead at 12 o'clock. And 11 o'clock is just to the left of dead ahead. So if you add up the 2 ones in 11, you get twos for passing on the twos. So this mnemonic, it works the same whether you're meeting head on or overtaking from behind. You're telling the other boat which way you are turning to avoid them. So just kind of try that, write it out on a piece of paper, an analog clock, put 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock and kind of be thinking about that, the ones and the twos. It's very easy to remember. And that is the terminology that you will hear when you're on the rivers. Part of your responsibility with the other boat, when the other boat communicates its navigation intentions via sound signals, is you must answer with a 1 toot or a 2 toot to indicate your agreement. If you disagree, it's 5 short blasts to indicate that you need to renegotiate. And how that may happen is there may be an obstruction not visible to you, but visible to the other captain. So if they agree and give you the same reply as your request, that means you're good to go. And you can do the same thing by using radio communications instead of your horn, but that satisfies your responsibility under the rules. These commercial captains, they know every inch of these waters. And the bigger the boat and the longer the tow, the harder it is for them to maneuver, but they know exactly where they can go and exactly where they cannot. There are a lot of safe places for you out of their way. In the hierarchy of maneuverability, you have to stay out of their way as they are constrained by draft. That's in the nav rules. But it's in your best interest and safety to negotiate every passing situation. And by using correct procedures on the radio, that raises your status to tolerable in the eyes of the captain of the other vessel. Because face it, most professional captains have some degree of disdain for recreational boaters until you show them the courtesy and professionalism by using proper procedures. And that starts by calling them by name, since you have AIS to identify them. And then when you call them and ask them if they want you on the ones or the twos, you just went up several more notches on the respect scale. So treat them with courtesy and respect, and they'll return it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you're out there right now where the water is low on the inland rivers, it's even more important because those tows have less maneuverability towards either side of the river because the water is just so low right now, but they also know where there's the most water for you to pass them. So make sure you are following their guidance, because they really do, as Dave said, know every inch of that waterway. So quickly, if we can, the last one we wanted to go through today is contacting a marina as you're approaching. You've got a reservation for the evening. This one can sometimes be tricky because we find that it's a little bit more challenging than some of these other scenarios we've been through to get a response. So sometimes you will end up calling the marina on the phone, but let's assume that the marina is monitoring their VHF on the channel that you have found in their, in their information, whether that's through one of your guidebooks or by checking their website or whatever it might be. Let's run through the scenario of contacting a marina.
Okay, Kim, the same procedure that we've done all along so far, call them by name, identify yourself, ask them, where do you want me? And, you've already, found them where they are on the radio. But, one of the things that's very important, that if they give you a dock assignment, they say, come into slip B6. Okay, well, that'd be helpful if I knew how to get to B6. So, for more instructions, do I turn right? Do I turn left? How many docks over is dock B? And where is slip 6? Is somebody going to be down there to watch me? But whatever they tell you, make absolutely dead flat certain that you parrot back exactly what they told you to do, so there's no misunderstanding. In Isla Mirada, my brain interpreted something different than what they told me. They told me to turn right at the second opening. My brain interpreted that as turning right at the second dock, and I promptly run aground in 1 foot of water. So parrot back what they tell you. Make sure that you have clear understanding. But and then always ask if there's any navigation issues that you need to be aware of before you approach their channel from the mark channel. They may tell you, favor red or green or whatever. But it's very important to understand that there's a difference between ATONs, that's aids to navigation that are maintained by the Coast Guard, and PATONs, which are private aids to navigation maintained by private owners such as marinas. Not always does this maintenance happen timely, so make sure you have local knowledge before transiting through those areas. And the other thing is, not all marinas may have your viewpoint in mind. They know where everything is and they have local knowledge, but you probably don't, as this is probably your first visit. So the good marinas are understanding and patient with you as you find your way to a slip. Don't be afraid to ask for it. Ask for local knowledge, because it's critical for your safety, and be sure to ask for it.
Yeah.
And it's just so important. I can't tell you, local knowledge in any form is critical to your safety.
Yeah, and we
So-
always when trying to find our way to a slip before arriving at the marina, we always get kind of a Google Earth view of the marina to just have that perspective of coming in. But we also search for a dock map, basically, so we can get that visual of where the slip is. It just I am much more of a visual person, a visual learner, so being able to see where we're going as opposed to just hear from the marina where we were going helps me tremendously. So for the other visual learners out there, that might be helpful.
Yeah.
Anything else, Dave, as we move towards wrapping up? Anything we overlooked when talking about the marinas?
Well, I think just kind of in closing, I just want to say that the marine radio is really a critical tool, and it's really your primary form of communications with other mariners and emergency services, such as the Coast Guard. Learning to use it properly with the correct procedure, if you do that, you'll be contributing to the safety of others as well as yourself and your crew. So make sure that you speak into the microphone about 2 to 4 inches away from your mouth. And for anybody that is kind of watching, I've got my ham radio here. It kind of looks something like this, about 2 to 4 inches away. It's about a 45-degree angle. And, if you get up here and swallow the microphone, you sound really kind of muffled. And, if there's a lot of ambient noise, do your best to kind of shield it as much as possible, because, wind can interfere with it. When you're talking on a handheld, do your very best to keep that antenna in a vertical position. And the reason you do that is because that matches the polarization of all other VHF radios you want to reach. If you turn it sideways, you incur a loss of distance, and sometimes a complete loss of signal, as the radio waves will now go up and down into the water and out into outer space instead of horizontally to the surface, reaching other boaters. Learn those pro words, practice using them, learn the phonetic alphabet, and learn the numbers in the event that you need to spell out part of your message. But just like any other skill that we have, practice makes perfect, as it builds competence, and that builds confidence. So be safe and have fun.
Yeah, great advice, great information. And yes, the practice makes perfect. You can become comfortable with this before you ever leave the dock by practicing at home. do what Dave and Nan Ellen just did with, practice the interactions with each of you playing one of those roles to the point that it's comfortable, and it'll just be a much easier adaptation when you get out there on the water. So Dave and Nan Ellen Fuller, both directors at the Coast Guard Auxiliary in their own rights. So thank you for sharing all of this detail with us today. We really appreciate you giving us this knowledge, and we hope you'll join us again soon.
Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Kim.
And thanks to everyone who's watched and listened today. We'll be back next week with another episode of Great Loop Radio. Until then, safe cruising.